Right. So welcome to you all. As I can see, it's people from Europe, from Britain. I don't know if Britain's still in Europe, but there's also people from, from Britain.
For a long while.
Yeah, in Europe, if not the EU.
But you can see the rest of Europeans, the Britons won't stop talking, though, will they? And also, I can see people from America, and I know Rogerio is going to be joining us from Brazil. So, welcome to everybody. As we said in the advertising of this session, it's a little bit different. Previous webinars, we've had a speaker or more than one speaker sometimes, and we've then had followed that with questions and discussion. But following the conference, which we had about a month ago, which many of you were on, and which I think people felt was really quite successful, we thought this is not exactly a follow-up to the conference, but it's partly that. It's an opportunity for people just to ask questions, and then those questions will lead to a discussion. And what we're particularly concerned about is to try and focus it on possible solutions. So we know what the problems are. We live with the problems. But if we can try, and it's fine to talk about the problems, but the focus is really on solutions. What you're doing in your own individual countries, your own individual airports where you've been successful, but also where we can possibly work as a network together to try and put additional pressure on to try and find solutions to particular problems. So I will facilitate it, but facilitate it as a discussion. Now, Jos and Rogerio have been very helpful in putting in some questions beforehand. They've emailed them to Dominique. So, Jos, I'm going to start with you, if I may. It may be worth when you speak just to introduce yourself and say what country you're from, and if you're from an airport, which airport you're from. Jos, your questions are really, certainly some of them are following on the well-received points you made at the conference about in Belgium. You one of the things you want to do is phase out night flights by 2024, and the other interesting one, which people were really interested in at the conference, is capping the number of flights at an airport, not just annually, but hourly as well. Some airports have got caps, most of them don't. And the other issue you raised was the question of the European Parliament debating the new ETS. Do you want to kick off with those questions and those points, and we'll then open things up from there?
Okay, thank you very much. As John was saying, I'm part of action, I would say, group here around Brussels Airport, and we've just launched a couple of months ago this campaign and also a petition in order to make sure that the new exploitation and environmental license, which the Brussels Airport will need as from 2024, has, I would say, a number of new conditions in it. And as John was saying, we have, of course, a lot of demands, but in order to find a platform where everybody was agreeing to support, we have limited it to 4. And 2 of them have just been summarized by John. So capping flights per year and per hour, that's one. And secondly, phasing out night flights by 2024, so when the new license. Now, these are 2 points where we meet with a lot of resistance, I can tell you. And it's incredible. And the arguments are, of course, are economic, mainly economic and jobs. You are going to kill the business of the airport, which is one of the, I would say, economic engines in Belgium, next to the port of Antwerp, and you will be cutting or losing a lot of jobs. We disagree because we think that if you turn around an airport to become an airport of the future and focus much more on added value instead of always more passengers, more freight, etc. That this could, but we have so far very little, I would say, detailed evidence to back our case, and we will need it because, you know, in the run-up to the new license and in our, we are meeting now all the political parties also in the next few months to convince them. So I was wondering, and that's the first question, I was wondering to what extent these 2 points have been taken up in other countries, and, you know, what arguments have worked there. If you have any solid figures to back up these two proposals we have. So that's one. The second one, but okay.
Let's hold, those two go together. Let's hold the European Parliament one for now, Joss, because I think it's a slightly separate issue, which we will definitely return to. Yes, it's interesting. If we look at, I think, the cap on flight numbers to start with, Heathrow's had a cap on flight numbers for 20 years. It was a condition of Terminal 5 in 2001, and that cap has not been exceeded. London City Airport has a cap as well, which they've had permission to rise, to increase every few years. So airports can live with caps, you know, and even a big airport like Heathrow, it can live with a cap. But it is an interesting question because it seems to me it's one of the critical questions for all communities. What a cap gives, if it's adhered to, is security for residents, that it won't be exceeded. And your hourly cap, I think, is particularly interesting, Joss, because it's the number of planes going over at a particular time, which can be the problem. Okay, Armel, you've got your hand up. Just before you come in, Armel, if I don't see your hand, because I can't see everybody on the same screen because there's a lot of us here, just feel free to speak out. But Armel, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, John. Just to say about the cap at Heathrow, it is not a cap per se. It is a cap on scheduled flights. Yes. They have permission from the government to have 16 to 18 flights per night. And they've had nights when it hasn't stopped until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So it is extremely flexible and elastic. But just to interrupt you a second, so people understand, Armel, that what you're saying is right, but there is an overall annual cap, isn't there? I agree with you, but really I wouldn't want Joss in Brussels to actually think that if you copy Heathrow you are okay. Please don't. You know, but the other thing which I think is very important, we've had many meetings, John, and thank you very much because they are very interesting, but we've had Frankfurt at one of our meetings as a speaker, and they have capped Frankfurt. So I think as one of the very large airports, certainly competing with Heathrow, Amsterdam and Paris, I think it would be interesting to actually have maybe another session with the person who represent people, communities around Frankfurt, and to understand how they manage to actually stop night flight at Frankfurt. Because I've had that discussion with John Holland here at Heathrow. Sorry, I live near Heathrow Airport, and John says, well, you know, other people can do what they want, but it wouldn't work for us. So we need to have very, very good evidence why the economy case for Frankfurt is there and why Lufthansa had made more profit with their cargo with no night flights during COVID.
Okay,
So
I
thank
think,
you.
thanks, Armel. There's probably two, I'll come to Bertold in a minute because you'll be able to answer some of those questions. There are probably two separate but related things here. There's an overall cap on the number of flights that's day and night, and there's also, as Josh was talking about, a curfew on night flights, which is related but separate. I think, Bertold, you got your curfew on night flights as part of the deal of the fourth runway being opened up. Is that right, at Frankfurt? You're on mute. You're on mute.
I see. Yes, I'm coming from Frankfurt, and so I know the situation in Frankfurt very well. We have in Frankfurt a night flight ban between 11 o'clock in the evening and 5 o'clock in the morning. While the ban between 11 o'clock and midnight is not very strong. We have late landings also just during this hour. We have an overall limit for the night of 133 planned flights, scheduled flights for the in average for the whole year. Every night 133 flights. And typically it is concentrated in the first night hour. It is concentrated to starts, and in the last night hour we have many landings, especially of heavy long distance planes.
And that's interesting, Bertold. And on the question about the economics and night flights, because Josh is saying, and rightly so, the argument made is that night flights are needed for the economy, particularly at the bigger airports like Frankfurt and Charles de Gaulle, Brussels, Heathrow. Has Lufthansa lost out? Has it lost money? Has Frankfurt lost money as a result of the night flight curfew, or is there no difference? I'll bring Bertold in and then Martin, who's of course is Mr. Frankfurt himself.
I think Frankfurt has no losses due of the night flight bans. We have as much night flights as before the opening of the new runway in 2011. And you can move night flights in many cases from the night to the day. And we observed that cargo flights from Hahn, where you have no night curfews, was moved instead of the night flight curfews in Frankfurt from Hahn to Frankfurt. For normal cargo, a night flight ban is not really an issue.
Okay.
And if we are discussing about cargo, we must also discuss about the pricing of cargo flights. Fraport practices dumping for cargo flights. It is very cheap. And that is unfair competition to other cargo airports, what they do, and they pay the cargo flights by the local passengers.
Thank you, Bertold. I'm going to move to Martin because you've been working on this issue for a long time in Frankfurt. And just this question again of, has the economy lost out in Frankfurt? But maybe a related question as well, Martin. Have the flights that used to fly at night in Frankfurt, have they gone to other airports? For example, have they gone to Leipzig?
Yes, some went to Leipzig, but this is not crucial for the situation, the question was, how was it possible to manage a night flight ban in Frankfurt between 11 in the evening and 5 in the morning? This was possible due to due to a decision at court for the 4th runway, for the landing runway. And as a compromise, we had a chance to have this night flight ban for 6 hours. So this is now regulated and by court, and it could not be moved anymore. It's like it's a fixed situation. Nobody could touch this at the moment. The influence that it had on those flights that had been before in the night time, between 11 in the evening and 5 in the morning, was the following. Some charter flights, low-cost flights, could not land anymore in the evening. When they came late in, they had trouble to come in late, and they had to decide to change their flight planning or to stay where they have been if they have been in delay. Secondly, some cargo flights went to Leipzig, but not too many, and Leipzig is increasing for cargo, is 24 hours operating, and is a big problem for the area of Leipzig. But we cannot say that all the night flights were shifting somewhere else, or the burden from these night flights went to somewhere else. That was not happening at all. We could say that Lufthansa, at the same year when we had the decision for the night flight ban, invested 770 million euros for a new cargo building in Frankfurt. So they announced in advance they would move away. And next day, when the decision was made, they say, we invest in Frankfurt because it's the best place to make cargo business. And it's still the best cargo airport in Europe from the perspective of Lufthansa. So it did not take away business. And today, figures of Lufthansa, we could not compare with the figures at the time because we have now 11 years of night flight ban, and the influence of other factors like COVID and others have influence as well at the profit of airlines, as we know. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. When I was with Hakan at Heathrow, we did a study, this is some years ago, into the economic cost of night flights on people's health. And we compared that with the economic benefits of night flights to the economy. We commissioned the Dutch consultancy CE Delft to do it. Now, and we said to them, look, we want an honest study. We don't necessarily want the answer that we as residents are looking for. And what they found at Heathrow was that the economic benefits of night flights but it was a very close thing, just outweighed the health impacts of night flights. It would be different at different airports, and it may be different now that we know more about the health impacts than we did a few years ago. But it seems to me to answer Joss's question, I think that sort of study probably does need to be done at different airports, because it gives us hard evidence, and it's relating to health. The only work that really was done on the economic cost of night flights more widely was by the European Commission. We're going back almost 20 years. And what they found is that while there were some economic benefits to night flights, actually they were vastly overstated. And I think it's because of that finding that we didn't really hear very much about that study after that. But I can certainly dig that study out. One other thing I want to say before bringing other people in is I think we probably have to distinguish between different types of night flights. At smaller airports, the night flights tend to be leisure flights, charter flights. It's very, very difficult to argue that if they were taken out of the night, that the economy would suffer. They're simply there for the operational convenience of the airlines. The flights, the longer distance flights, there is more of an economic case, but I think it's one that we can challenge. does anybody else want to say anything at this stage about
John, I think we
night
have a
flights?
question at the
Yes.
chat. Robert Buick is asking because he was confused about what Martin said and what Berthold said about the 133 flights. Can someone
Someone's playing music that Alfredo is not very keen on.
it was my phone, I turned it off.
It's
so
your phone, it's yourself. Okay. That's allowed.
Okay. Can Berthold answer that?
Martin, I think Martin's going to answer it.
Martin, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, the 133 flights that Berthold mentioned are the following. We have flights between 10 and 11 in the evening and 5 to 6 in the morning. Those flights are critical because they are the first flights in the morning or the late flights in the evening. And we wanted to stop that those flights are increasing at the moment when we have a curfew. We did not want that this hour, the last hour in the evening and the first in the morning, gets the most used hours at all of the day because of the night flight ban. And this was regulated in a separate decision that 133 flights only should happen in these 2 hours, morning and evening, and that they should not start right away at 5 o'clock like a hammer, that all flights come in the first 15 minutes and the last flights are in departure before 11. But in reality, it's like this, that the first half hour in the morning is the most problematic hour with noise today. And in the evening, you could see that most of the flights leave between 10:15 and 10:45.
Martin, that's very helpful. And I think it's very similar to Heathrow. What I want to suggest, I want to come back in a minute to the cap on the number of flights that Joss raised. But on night flights, I think there's a lot of interesting work to do, particularly around the alleged economic benefits of night flights. I'm just wondering whether it might be an idea for UECNA to set up a small working party to look at the whole aspect of night flights, and particularly the economics of night flights. Now, people don't need to agree or disagree right now, but it's a suggestion I'm putting forward, and I will put forward again when in the notes of the meeting. And if people are interested in forming a very loose working party to kind of scope out some ideas, then I think that may be a useful way forward. Do people, a very initial idea, do people feel that might be a useful thing to do? Yeah, there's some nods around the table. Yes, Josh, yes.
Unmute, yes. Well, thank you very much for all these interesting inputs and experiences. Now, one element we have been, I would say, thinking about is that a compromise could not only be on phasing out radically, because right now we have in Brussels, there is a night ban of 16,000 flights per year, of which 5,000 departures and 11,000 arrivals. Now, the arrivals are much less, I would say, taxing or damaging on people than departures. And one compromise we could possibly, but of course this remains between us, could be that we focus in the end on only accepting night flights arriving at the airport. That's and that departing from the airport should always take place during the day hours. That's number one. Number two, a big issue is the time zone. You know, I hear that in Frankfurt, it's from 11 till 5. And with possible squeezing flights from 10 till 11, which is already quite late in the evening also, or, you know, at the beginning of the night. And then, you know, planes queuing up at 5 o'clock, and between 5 and 7, you know, you have one plane after the other. Now, we are, in our campaign, we are asking that the night be defined from 11 till 7. That's another important issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, because 5 hours or, you know, 7 hours, no, 8 hours then, from 11 till 7. And there is also different, I would say, regimes all over the world in defining nights. So I think apart from the economic costs, there is the departure versus arrivals, and also how long do we want the night to be?
No, I absolutely agree, and you're quite right. Across the world, people define night in very different ways. I think the arrival departure thing is interesting. It probably varies from airport to airport, because at some airports departures are more problematic, at other airports the arrivals are. But interesting points. Debbie and Elavathira have got your hands up.
Hello.
Hi, Debbie. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, John. And so I heard a couple things. I just wanted to say that the curfew or the nighttime limitations at SeaTac is midnight to 5. Now, all of these are a creature of peak hour. Peak hour keeps getting shrunk, you know, or expanded actually, because of the other airport curfews affect other airports. So in other words, some can't take off in China at certain times, so they have to come in here. What we have is we don't have a curfew, we don't have limitations. We have a shaming program where the airport sends a letter to the airline if they're getting a lot of complaints about that particular carrier. We had a big cargo plane that would take off at 3 in the morning and wake up, you know, 70,000 people. So they would send a letter. Well, they've changed that plane to a different plane that's quieter. You know, some of these are creatures of other airport issues that drive, and you were talking about that, taking some planes off of Frankfurt and then they go somewhere else. So that's a problem. But somebody said that the talking about the impact, the economic impact. We have Zafar Zafari around BWI Airport in Baltimore, who's just done a study that found that the health impact losses for people living near BWI, especially in the next gen flight paths, were $40 million a year.
That is so interesting, Debbie,
Yes.
and that's higher than our study found at Heathrow. But
Right.
Interesting. The
So
next
now
gen is
there's
probably making
something-
it higher.
Yeah, there's something else that's very important, is that you have that noise that wakes people on the takeoff side. But talking about the landings not being as bad for noise, they are much, much worse for emissions. So for instance, the ultrafine particles, we found a 50 to 70% infiltration rate on the ultrafine particles from jets into the indoor environment. And without HEPA filtration or some kind of mitigation, these are just coming in to the homes of people that are breathing this at night. So one thing that needs to be done that people have to think about is that you have a dual impact of high levels of noise, plus every plane that's at 3,000 feet and below is infiltrating, their emissions are infiltrating your homes at night. So when you're sleeping, you're getting nitrogen oxides, you're getting sulfur, you're getting burned particles, you're getting ultrafines. Those are being breathed. So these health impacts are dual. They
Absolutely.
are cumulative and double.
Great. I'm going to have to, thanks very much for that, Debbie.
The Zafari study only looked at noise, John.
Okay, Yeah.
Did not look at health for emissions.
It's wider. That's a really good point. Really good point. Elefthera, you wanted to come in.
Yes, John. One thing I wanted to say is we have to look for the information about the night flights and cargo flights, because there is not always possible to get these facts from the airports. So it's another thing that we have to look about. You remember that we have this problem the last time we have checked about night flights, and I don't know if you all have access to this information in your countries. So I want to look about that.
No, you're absolutely right. It's very, very hard to get accurate information. Some countries it's easier than others because they're a little bit more open. But it is if we set up a working group, and there does seem, I see in the chat there's quite a lot of support for it. I think that's a sort of information we would try and find out at Elefthera, because it's pretty basic. And as Martin Peaches just put in the chat, the WHO defines night as 8 hours. That's absolutely right. Can we move on to Joss's second point, which we've touched on? This is the idea of a cap on the number of, forget about night flights for a second. Well, let's park that. An overall cap on the number of flights at an airport. Heathrow and London City have a cap. Stansted has a cap on the number of passengers. What's happening at the other airports? Ivana from Tempino, you have in theory a cap on the number of flights, a limit, don't you? You fought very hard.
We have obtained a cap of 65. We have in our airport could land or depart up to 400 planes a day. We have fight, and we have had a limit of 65 commercial flights and 61 general aviation flights. And then there are flights for political reasons, for emergency, but there are a few flights. These limits are not so respected. So, and we fight now to respect these limits for commercial flights and for general aviation. We had a problem for figures about general aviation, because we have the number per day for commercial aviation, but not for general aviation per day. And so it's difficult to control if the limit is respected. We have had another limit. Half, we have a low-cost traffic, mainly of Ryanair and Wizz Air, and they must use the half of their planes must be in Ciampino, must be the less noisiest that is possible. Be a Boeing 737 MAX 8. But we have a few of these planes, not 50%, but 2 flights a day per day. Everyone else have had this rule about an amount of planes more silenciosi, less noisy.
Excellent. And there was a question in the chat came through to you, Ivana. You've got an overall cap, but for night flights, you're not going to have night flights at all, are there?
We have had a ban from 11 up to 6 in the morning, but we have had over 600 night flight from in this year, in 11 months. And in July, we have had 90 night flight. And this is a problem. We have, we fight against them. The mainly part is about in 11 and 5, 11 and 10, but some flights arrived at 3 in the night, 4 in the night.
No,
very...
but actually, although it's not.
The load, no. They load not the rule. They must go to Fiumicino, but the Italian authority for flights accept them in Ciampino.
Okay, and that's really interesting what you had to say. And I mean, many people know Ciampino Airport. If you don't, people live very, very close.
Very close. We are very close to the runway.
That's right. And it's the same with London City. And it's interesting when we've got airports where people are living very close, it seems more likely that they can get a cap on the number of flights. We'll hear from Rogério in a minute from Brazil, but again, Belo Horizonte, it's a similar sort of situation.
Yes. I spoke with Belo Horizonte campaigner, and they are in a similar situation. They have a lot of flights very close to the houses.
No,
very close.
Thank you so much for that. Just before we leave the idea of cap, I think, Wouter, in theory, there's a cap, or there was a cap, wasn't there, at Schiphol Airport? I mean, we're going from a smaller airport now to a much larger one. I know things are changing quite rapidly at Schiphol, and interesting post from Duncan Sanderson in the chat. But Wouter, what's the current situation at Schiphol?
Well, the current situation is that there is an official cap of 500,000, but we don't get that number because of the corona pandemic and the chaos at Schiphol Airport, where they don't have enough people to handle all the luggage and the security. So in fact, there are about 375,000 now. But what is interesting is that the minister has said that the cap from 500,000 is too high. Yeah. And he wanted to diminish that to 440,000. And the reason is that 500,000 flights give too much noise. And when people go to court, what they did last year, they're going to lose it there. So they want, the government wants to diminish the number of flights now. Well, that's 60,000 less. Okay, that's nice, but we think that must be much more. So, but we're happy with the beginning of this.
No, and all credit to you for your campaign. But what's interesting is, I'm coming back to Jos's original point. The Dutch government is now saying that the cap will be lower. Presumably, they're saying that they can lower the number of flights using Schiphol without impacting on the Dutch economy.
Well, of course, everybody's shouting who's in the aviation sector that's it's not possible, and we are all going down, and the economy and all the usual arguments. But of course, that's nonsense, and the Schiphol has grown too much too many flights have been there the past 5 years, I think. And that's a problem. But another point is that it's not sure that ICAO will not protest against this. So we made a video on this. I did with Fulco, our home video anchorman, and with Willem, who has a lot of knowledge on this matter.
And it's on,
So
it's
you
on,
can-
and it's on the UECNA website, isn't it?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Okay.
we,
Right. I'm sorry, but on you go. But I want to move on in a minute.
well, there are many more arguments to lower the number of flights, and that's on the emissions. So that's
Absolutely.
another way to tackle this problem, hopefully.
What I'm wondering, is whether we do, because there's a lot of issues here. You're absolutely right. Is whether we do a webinar in the new year specifically on this question of a cap on the number of flights at airports. What are the reasons for having it, and what are the reasons, largely economic, that are made against it? So we can explore it in more detail. Would that be helpful, Jos? Yeah, excellent. Right. Do you want? I'm conscious that Rogerio has a good question as well. But Jos, do you want to very quickly, if you can, say a little bit about the European Parliament and the new ETS, which is the other thing you mentioned in your note to Dominique?
Yes. Well, most of you will probably know what ETS is.
You may want to spell out a little bit for our friends who are not from Europe.
Yes, well, this is a system which has been imposed, you know, on all the airlines and on all the sectors which are emitting CO2, that they should pay or should get certificates, I would say, for emitting CO2 per ton. And so they have created a market for CO2 emissions. Now, to come back immediately to the airlines, the aviation sector has, like some other sectors, have got emission rights. That means they have a right to, I would say, to blow into the atmosphere, you know, a number of tons of CO2 for which they do not have to compensate. Now, the airlines have had very high level of, I would say, emission rights. Now, there's a whole debate going on in connection with, you know, changing or updating the ETS system, that these emission rights should be reduced. A particular issue for us in Europe is that this ETS is applicable to only flights within the European Economic Area. We cannot impose this on international flights. So this has been the assumption, because, you know, then we are doing things which are not in line with the agreements, the international agreements of so many decades ago. And but there is a whole debate now that why not? And there is pressure that international long-haul flights from Europe should also be included. One of the chief advocates for that is O'Leary from you know, Ryanair, known airline. And you know, he's now, together with Transport and Environment, lobbying that the long-haul flights be included, because they are discriminating, you know, to give them, you know, a free ride is discriminating against. So there's a whole dynamic.
He doesn't miss a trick. He doesn't miss a trick, does he, Jos?
No, he's a smart. Well, we know he's a smart guy. He's very, very smart. But coming back to the point we are making, or I was asking also, is that, of course, reducing the emission rights to the aviation sector will force them to pay more for what they push in the air. So it will be an incentive for them, we hope, and this is the whole debate. It will be an incentive for airlines to switch to modern planes, which are emitting less. because all the carriers are very, very bad, and new carriers have really, the technology has really improved. But modern planes are not only emitting less, they are also much or less noisy, far less noisy than the older planes. So in fact, while we may be a group or a platform, which is primarily fighting against noise, we may want to align ourselves to the lobbies also pushing for reducing the emission rights to the airlines, because it will be a win-win. The emissions of fine dust and CO2 will go down, but also the noise will.
Just, it's a good point, and it's a really clear explanation of ETS. Just before I bring Debbie in, we do as UECNA work quite closely with Transport and Environment, T&E. We tend to take the lead on noise, and they tend to take the lead on CO2 emissions. But I can see actually an argument for us working even more closely on this particular issue, particularly when it's a very current issue in Europe. So we'll take that away as UECNA and see how we can move it forward. Debbie.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that people understand the issue about reducing emissions is that newer planes, newer engines do use less fuel. But when they're talking about reducing emissions, oftentimes they're reducing one emission at the expense of another. So in other words, in the 90s or 80s, the big push was to reduce carbon monoxide from the engines. Well, the result was the engines burn hotter, and that reduces CO, but it increases NOx tremendously. And in fact, the increase in NOx was more significant than the reduction in CO. So if you look at global fuel use, you see it's climbing. So you may get a little bit of emission reduction in some areas, but overall planes are using more fuel. There's more planes using more fuel. So we don't have any realized on the ground near airport emission reduction at all.
Debbie,
you might have global, some small amount of global CO2, but then again, aviation is still the fastest growing contributor to CO2 globally.
No, sorry to catch up a little bit there, but I think you're absolutely right to remind us once again, it needs to be looked at in the totality. I'm moving on a little bit because I'm conscious of time. And Rogerio from Brazil, you raised a point with Dominique, following on from the point you made at the conference about ICAO and how you feel ICAO should be assisting communities. Do you want to say a little bit? Do you want to expand a bit more on that?
Hi, John. Thank you everybody for being here. Yes, my point is that aviation, civil aviation is a global industry, and it has impact all over the world on the ground, on the communities who suffer those impacts. Given that ICAO is a UN body that govern or lead the regulations for civil aviation, they also should be looking at the impact of this industry on the ground, on the communities. And I say that because, as I mentioned before, I did work at with grassroots environmental organization throughout Latin America, and I have seen many UN bodies supporting local NGOs to do their jobs better with grants or some special programs for, let's say, environmental justice. There are special UN bodies like UNEP environmental program, specific for environmental programs. But also I did work at the World Bank in Washington for 3 years. And I see from inside the World Bank that even the World Bank is a financial organization. They have a series of grants, small grants that support some activities to support local governments, local organizations to do some baseline studies and some prepare themselves for further activities related to environmental or other issues. But I see a lot of related to environment. And I do work with one field of knowledge that affect people all over the world, which is, most in developing country, which is indoor air pollution, and caused by solid fuel use. And this affect about 1/3 of humanity today in the world. They're still using solid fuels that pollute, that generate a lot of indoor air pollution. And about 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, when you start working this, there was no funds at all for this. And that was a subject very neglected. And through these years, through a lot of lobbying and scientific science generate more information and pressing, eventually the UN Foundation, there's a foundation from the UN, created this global alliance, what they call for cleaner cook stoves. That is a global alliance of partners all over the world working towards how to address the issue of indoor air pollution that affect people, mostly poor people around the world. And the World Bank is one of the organizations that does support activities like that. So from that point of view, from perspective and seeing that, the aviation industry is very powerful, it's perhaps the richest industry in the world, which has created this impact on the ground, and then we communities, we are powerless, because first, we don't have all the knowledge to confront, to go into debate, to argue, and to ask for a balance on their impact. We don't have all the money to do more. And even we are all here, sitting here, most of us perhaps are doing it in a voluntary way. When the industry does, there are people are getting their paycheck to debate and spend hours working on that. And we do, with the little hours free that we have to dedicate to this. So it's a very unfair, unbalanced. And I think that coming from the UN body, I think is their obligation to look at what they can do better to do this global industry to act more effectively, more safe, and also with less environmental impact. And they are looking at now with the greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
But they are not looking at the details with the community who are suffering the noise and the air pollution on the ground. So just to conclude, I think that I see that ICAO can do more. They can support a global alliance, and as I sent an email early, I think they could create grants inside the organization to support us throughout the world that can provide competitive grants to do local studies and contribute to the global knowledge and to empower us to better negotiate on the city tables. So this is it.
Ruggiero, thank you very much for that. Just before I bring Robert in, those of you at the conference will know that there was some discussion about this and linked to the wider idea which Willem Franken has been putting for a long time about a global alliance in some way in which we cross continents can work together. We're beginning to talk together, which is great, but can we work together? I'm gonna bring Willem in to say a few words on that, but Robert, you want? I think your real hand was up. I was looking for an artificial hand, but a real hand will do just fine.
I'd just like to just comment on what Ruggiero was saying. I've been on, and John's been on it as well, but the Heathrow Community Noise Forum, which has morphed into the Noise and Airspace Change Forum since the PBN trial flights in 2014. Now, that was pushed upon the government. John will correct me if I'm wrong. Pushed upon by the government because of the fallout of the PBN flights. The political fallout was massive. The flights had to be flight trials had to be cancelled early. Now we fought for a long time, and we were successful in the end, and obtained our own consultant. The thing I just posted up there was from TO70 on one of the many things that we've asked them to look into. So I think, you know, if you can speak with somebody at your airport and say, you know, this is something that should be, they're the ones that the polluter should pay, should provide some sort of consultancy that whereby you can ask questions about how they can improve their operational procedures. So we've now just got our man back. So after it was canned on the COVID, so we'll see how that works on under the new forum of the NACF. So we'll let you know. But I'd like to also bring in just a point which I like to bang on quite a bit about funding and so forth. Is the Vienna Dialogue Forum is a forum at Vienna whereby they receive per passenger levy to fund their organization, and the concept behind that started some 20 odd years ago, and it was started because the airport wanted a third runway, and everyone around the area said, no, we don't want a third runway. We want to talk about your 2 runway operations. So, and it's been very successful. Their motto is that we will do better than the legislation requires. So, you know, very good noise insulation, a typical three bedroomed in property in the 54 dB noise control can expect to receive something like 54,000 euros. When you contrast that with Heathrow, you get 4,000. It doesn't depend on where you are, and that's at 60 decibels. So, you know, you just need some organization that can actually fight your corner. And I think something along those lines, like the Vienna Dialogue Forum, I try and promote it, we get one at Heathrow, would be a great advantage to you if you can manage that. Thank you.
Robert, thank you very much. I do see Willem and Martin, I'll bring you in, but that I think has been, that was really useful, because it's actually said, Rogerio was saying something could be done at an international level, and I think that's worth exploring. But what you're actually highlighting is that at an airport level, there are live examples of airports in one way or another helping local communities. I think we may want to return to this in a future webinar. Willem and then Martin.
Thank you, John. As some of you know, I've been working in the ICAO arena, so I know the ICAO process quite well. I would like to share something with you, which is not good news, but it is the ICAO convention. Can you see the screen?
We can, yes.
And in Article 44, you see the objectives of ICAO. And the objectives are things like encourage the art of design and operation for peaceful purposes. Sounds very good. You know, ICAO was started at the end of the war. But one of the most important things they have to do is to promote generally the developments of all aspects of international civil aeronautics. And I hate to say it, but that's what ICAO does. So you will not find a very enthusiastic crowd at ICAO when you ask them for money, which will basically be used to reduce operations. You may find that you will be received very friendly, and they will say it's an excellent idea. They would love to talk to you, like many airports do. But the reality is that ICAO is not there to help the citizens around airports. ICAO is there to promote all aspects of international civil aviation. This is why I think that there are ways to organize the pressure also towards ICAO, but that would be to combine funds from all over the world. I don't know how many millions of people are affected by aircraft noise, but it is certainly millions. If each of them would be willing to pay 1 or 2 euros or dollars, there would be a budget that would be sufficient to really put some pressure in the ICAO arena, or for that matter, support individual airports around the world. And my humble opinion is that that should be organized efficiently, because waiting for aviation-minded organization to give you money, you will find they only do it to mute you or make you to silence you, and also make you a little bit dependent on the system. So what is important is that we organize the anti-aircraft lobby independently and ourselves, independent from money from any organization except for ourselves. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Willem, thank you very much for that. I've got a suggestion in a minute, but let's just take. I am conscious of we're running over time a little bit, and people have got other things to do. So let's take Martin, Debbie, and then I may try and sum things up. Martin, you came off mute and you've gone back on mute.
I'm off. Thank you.
You're off. Excellent.
Thank you. Just picking up there on ICAO, I don't disagree, but in fact, each country, so just take UK, the government issues what's called guidance, and it's environmental guidance to the Civil Aviation Authority, who are the regulator here, on guidance on environmental requirements in the pursuit of the Air Navigation Act. So I would suggest locally, each country ought to have some guidance, which I don't know whether ICAO provides an overall umbrella for that, but certainly in the UK, we have guidance from the government to the CAA. That was the first point I was made. Second point is Robert raised in the middle of a very lucid thing on Heathrow, PBN. So my question is, should we be looking at what the advent of the introduction of performance-based navigation, sat-nav in other words, has on people living under the flight paths? Because what PBN does, that's what it will deliver, is very, very much more accurate and consistent flight paths. And John and I have talked about this around his experience in Heathrow and my experience here in Stansted. And you get effectively a very narrow corridor of a very noisy footprint under flights that are being coded up in the avionics on board the aircraft for PBN. And the question is, do you want, which is better? Are you going to give a fewer number of people a lot of noise, or are you going to spread the misery wider, as we did when we're using terrestrial navigation? So that seems to me a very, very philosophical issue, which may differ from airport to airport and local community to local community. But I'd be very interested to know what people's views were on the introduction and the implementation of performance-based navigation as far as noise is concerned. Thank you.
Martin, thank you. I think we've had in the past, some of our American friends have talked passionately about how PBN has been introduced and badly introduced in America. I think what will happen is the PBN issue, you're quite right, is not going to go away. And I think it's something we'll continue to work on and maybe come back during the course of the year to have another webinar discussion on PBN, because it is coming in. Debbie, and then the final word to Rogerio. Debbie, on you go.
So we had a study done around SeaTac Airport looking at the health impacts going on in the communities. We found that there were quite a number of very significant health effects happening to the people living around the airport. And the UW Move Up study, which I've been an advisory board member on that study for the last 5 years, looking at ultrafine particles and, like I said, the infiltration of particles and other pollutants from aircraft into homes. Well, the area surrounding the airport where they noticed the health impacts is a 10-mile area. It corresponds to the landing path and includes PBN, of course. Landing paths are much worse. Planes are much dirtier coming in for a landing. This impact area is 10 miles. So if you were to put that schematic on the 24 busiest airports in the US, there would be 33 million people affected. So when you're talking about millions of people, you're talking about, you know, many, many millions of people. And we observed these health impacts, John, in the 10-mile radius. So it wasn't unique to just the flight path, because these ultrafine particles travel extensively once they're laid down. But they do have a ground level impact, which corresponds directly with the aircraft arrival going over, and then the impact seen on the ground with a big spike in ultrafine particle emissions. So this is like standing on a freeway. When you have these emissions, the levels is like standing on a freeway. So you're getting that 24 hours a day standing on a freeway. And even inside your homes, you're not afforded that much additional protection.
No, it's a point well made. It's a point well made, Debbie. I think we're thinking of doing something, and possibly in conjunction with yourselves in the States, about ultrafine particles, because it's something we haven't really, certainly in Europe, properly explored, whereas I know you've done a lot of work on it.
Yes, John, I've shared in the chat the study from Dr. Huda done at Boston Logan to find the infiltration.
Brilliant, brilliant, Debbie. Rogerio, you're going to, before I sum up, you can have the last word on this, because I think it generated, what you said, generated a lot of interesting discussion.
Yes, I just want to come back a little bit on the issue, is that why do I think it is important to have ECAL have a program to support communities? No? First is because it's a real impact of aviation. It's one of our aspects of aviation, as I mentioned before here. And to have ECAL have its program to support communities, it being grants or a global alliance, they will be, say, infiltrated by the reality of the ground of the community. You have somebody there that would understand more, be more compassionate about what's happened on the ground, and they would be forced to receive information and deal with information related to those communities' effect. So it's a way to force them to do something about more than just good words that they have today. You know, I think it's important to have that program inside. That will, it's like planting a seed inside the ECAL that would grow and transform their perspective of what's really happened on the ground. And the same issue we're facing here in Brazil. We're dealing with the government, the federal government, and we see that they create some policies that, oh, let's be nice to the community and create a forum. But the forum, the way they create it to discuss this, is all controlled by the airport authorities. And the government agency that's supposed to be controlling and overseeing this, they just, they don't do the job rightly. And the reason is because there are no sympathetic people inside those organizations that has a sense of the community. They always looking for the companies, the airlines. And one thing that we're getting together here with the Congonhas Airport in São Paulo to see that now that Brazil is going to have a change on government, we're going to have a more democratic government in place, to see if we can have created a specific agency or directory inside those government bureaucracy in Brasilia, to have one person that will be dealing with communities. Because it's their mandates, but they don't have anybody yet sitting there that has this compassion about what we're suffering here. So we'll see if we're going to see if we can create that agency or that specific job inside the federal government.
Jerry,
it's the same for ECAL.
That's great. And I think we can try and work together on that, because, it's in some of the European countries that was the situation, and it has improved. And, let's keep talking about that. We're going to stop in just a couple of minutes because people have got to go. So let me just, a really good discussion. Let me just summarize the actions that came out of it. I think there was general support for a working group on a curfew on night flights. And we'll take all this forward in emails to everybody. there was people liked the idea of doing a webinar specifically on the idea of caps on flights and the benefits, and also looking at or challenging the economic arguments against it. That's the second thing that came out. The third thing is that this whole question that Rogerio ended on here about how the authorities, whether it's ICAO or individual airports, how they can assist communities. What is the trigger to get them to assist communities? And again, I'm wondering whether we do a webinar, possibly a working party, but a webinar on this, looking at different examples, because I think it's something that's emerged over the last year and we want to take forward. On Joss's point about European ETS, yes, UECNA will look at working more closely on this, particularly with T&E, because, as I say, it's something which is very current. A number of other issues did come up. So I think if you can do it in 1 minute, Rogerio, that's on you go. Is that a new hand? Yeah. Is that a legacy hand?
Oh no, I'm sorry. Sorry, no, I didn't.
It was a
turn it
legacy
off.
hand. That's just fine by me, because listen, thank you very much for your contribution. Thank everybody for your contributions. It has been recorded. We will eventually get it up on our website. We'll also save in the chat, and we'll work on webinars and working groups and come back to you and get things moving for 2023. So thank you all very much indeed for your contribution this evening. I think it's been a really good and helpful session.